Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a book review for Startling House by Alix E. Harrow. Alix E. Harrow is an author that I wanted to read for the longest time, and I do have one of her other books, The 10,000 Doors of January. It's just one that I haven't gotten to yet. And when Startling House came out, it just sounded like the perfect October spooky read to me, so I decided to just pick it up on a whim. So this is my first adventure into her world, into her works, into her writing, and this is an adult fantasy book, and it is a standalone. So the way I'm going to structure this review is I'm going to discuss what this book is about, some things that I liked, some things that I didn't like, and then I'm going to give the book an overall rating. So if you're interested in skipping to any one of those timestamps, please check the description box below. And if I discuss any spoilers at any part in the review, I will also warn you ahead of time and put those timestamps down in the description box. In Startling House, we are following a girl named Opal, and Opal lives in Eden, Kentucky, and it is just a very rural, poor town. And Opal lives with her younger half-brother, Jasper. When Opal was 15, her mother died in a car accident, and Opal was in the car with her, but she survived. And just life was never the same after that. Opal had to forge documents to lie about her age so that she could get custody of her younger brother. And the two of them have been living in this motel room owned by a woman who knew their mother and is kind of just doing it out of the kindness and goodness of her heart. So Opal basically grew up with nothing. She grew up very, very poor, and she works kind of like a part-time retail job, just trying to make ends meet. And she has no qualms with lying and thieving and stealing in order to bring in more income for her and her brother. Opal really has no aspirations in life per se, except to make sure that her brother gets out of Eden and has a future for himself. And she is currently trying to save up for him to go to this private high school that she feels like will give him more opportunity. But because of her part-time job, she's just not able to save up the money. In Eden, Kentucky, there is kind of a backstory that goes along with this town. So there's this family known as the Gravely family, and they own this large power plant, and they mine a lot of the minerals in Eden. So the Gravely mining operation is basically holding up Eden's economy. And then the Gravely family's history kind of ties into Opal's story as well as into the story of Startling House. So Startling House is this supposedly haunted house that was owned by this woman named Eleanor Starling, who was married to some of the descendants of the Gravleys. And I'm trying to remember, like, if it was great-grandparents or I don't remember. But she married one of the Gravely brothers, about 100 years ago. And then he died, and she married the brother. And when he died, she ended up building this huge house and living secluded in this house. And there's kind of like a lot of rumors around whether she murdered these Gravely men or exactly what happened. So there's just a lot of superstitions around this house. And no one really knows exactly who has lived there over time because Eleanor's no longer alive. And the last man to have been known to live there was a man named Arthur Starling, who was supposedly like related to Eleanor or a descendant of Eleanor in some shape or form. Not only that, but Eleanor is also famous for writing this children's book called The Underland or something along those lines. And when Opal was little, she read this book over and over again, and it's all about a girl who ends up going to this world underneath our world that's occupied by beasts, and it's got like a horror element and a dark element to it. And Opal read that book when she was a kid and absolutely loved it, and has always been curious about Startling House and Eleanor Starling and her story. And one day, Opal ends up getting an offer to work at Startling House from Arthur, from the descendant, cleaning the house. And he offers to give her an exorbitant amount of money to clean this house. And she takes it because, like I said, she's trying to pay for her brother's private high school tuition. And once Opal is employed, she begins to piece all of the different stories together to find out the truth about Eleanor Starling, about the Gravleys, about Startling House, about the Underland, and about her and her brother Jasper. So every single one of these pieces are put together at the end to make a complete story. So now I'm going to talk about the things that I liked. So the first thing I liked was the author's prose. I actually read a couple of reviews that people said that they didn't like her writing style. I personally did. I thought it was a bit purpley, but not to the point where it was distracting, and I felt like it fit with the story. She just is a very, very flowery writer, and I liked it. And she is able to describe things in ways that I wouldn't think about, and also in ways that evoke emotion from me. So I personally liked her prose. The next thing I liked was the atmosphere of this book. I think this is a really, really good October fall read because we do have this old, creaky, spooky house, but it's not scary per se because I thought that this house was originally haunted, but it's actually not. However, the house is kind of like its own character in the story. It is sentient in a certain way, and we learn how that came to happen at the end of the book. Opal kind of, or the author kind of talks about how the magic that goes into making this house kind of alive. So the house is kind of a character in this book, and it kind of reminded me of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And I just thought that that aspect of it was well done because the house responds to Opal's emotions and Arthur Starling's emotions and things that they do. And then I also liked how the fairy tale aspect of this story was interwoven. And I don't know if any of you guys have read The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, but this story reminded me a lot of that because you have this fairy tale that Opal is searching for and relating to, only to find out that that fairy tale is rooted in truth, and that there actually is an underland and there actually are these beasts that were described in this fairy tale. So I just like when there are these parallel stories that do converge, and I really like the trope of there being like a parallel world to our own. I've read a couple of stories recently that have been like that. House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland had that. It always reminds me of Stranger Things. So if you like the trope of having that parallel universe or parallel world that can be accessed through different portals in our own world, then you would definitely enjoy this story. And lastly, I really, really liked how for such a short book, this book was incredibly character-centric. And these characters, especially Opal, grew so much over the course of the story. And even though I really, really liked the character arcs and I really liked how Opal was so protective and loving towards her brother, the characters themselves kind of do tie into the things that I disliked about this book. So now I'm going to transition into the things I disliked. And the first thing would be Opal herself. So I personally couldn't really connect with Opal. I don't think she was necessarily meant to be written as a likable character because I personally found her unlikable. Unfortunately, I really cannot respect characters that lie and steal and cheat and are rude to other people and, you know, throw obscenities at other people because yes, you can make an excuse for yourself about why those actions are acceptable, but in the grand scheme of things, it contributes absolutely nothing positive to social interactions and society in general, so why would you do it? So even though Opal was trying to justify what she did, I still did not agree with it. And especially when author Starling was being so generous to Opal, Opal was 100% stealing from him and betraying him. And she had no reason to because he was being overly generous towards her and she was just being a jerk towards him. I also could sympathize with Opal regarding the death of her mother. I cannot imagine losing a parent. Both of my parents are still alive and I'm grateful for that every day. But I feel like Opal was putting her mother on a pedestal because there were times when she would describe her mother as being irresponsible and into drugs and using men for their money. And I'm like, how can you glorify somebody who makes such bad decisions and because of her bad decisions literally put you in the position that you are currently today? And I felt like that was never recognized in this book, that people are capable of good and bad things, but why are you going to celebrate the negative things about a person, especially when it hurts others? And once again, I feel like Opal was trying to justify things that her mother did based on her mother's backstory and where she came from, which is a spoiler, so I'm not going to go into that. But I just feel like there were other alternatives that her mother could have taken and didn't. So I didn't like Opal's mother either. And then there were a lot of social themes that the author touched upon throughout the book, but then did not elaborate on. And I can appreciate a good book that addresses social issues, but I feel like when you start to add in too many things and then don't elaborate on them, it's kind of awkward and kind of throws me from the story. So the author tried to address certain things such as racial injustice. She tried to address big corporations and their effect on small towns and pollution. And none of that was delved into that deeply. So it just felt very surface level to me and lacked any substance to make it good. The only social theme I feel like that she really honed in on was income disparity, because Eden is a poor town and Opal is poor. But at the same time, I personally do not 100% agree with how that was portrayed. And here's why. So, Opal never takes advantage of any of the resources that are available to people who need them. And I know here in the United States and in the state I live in, there are so many resources for people that need help, especially if you have a child. So Opal was the legal guardian of her minor brother, Jasper, which would have made her eligible for certain social programs. And not only that, but I live in the Bible Belt, and Kentucky is part of the Bible Belt, and I can't go half a mile without running into the front door of a church. And I don't know what kind of experiences this author had, but any church who is genuinely devoted to the teachings of Christ will help somebody who needs them, because that's what Jesus did. So, like, she just made all of these excuses about people who turned their back on her and wouldn't help her. And I'm like, girl, when did you help yourself? Like, why are you playing the victim? Why don't you take the bull by the horns and do what you're supposed to do to get yourself in a better position? So take advantage of social programs, ask for help. She never asked for help. And I just felt like her situation was just not portrayed well at all. It was kind of like a woe is me type situation. I would have really rather much read about a character who was able to advocate for herself and her brother and was able to be smart enough and resourceful enough and resilient enough to make changes in her life. And yes, eventually, I guess she does do that through Startling House. But if you look at it, her brother Jasper does these things, because at the end of the book, we learn what he's done to better his life. And I'm like, why can't Opal have figured that out? So just another reason that I didn't like the main character, and I just didn't like the way that her situation was portrayed. And another thing that I didn't like was the negative portrayal of small town America. You know, I grew up in an extremely large metropolitan area in South Florida. I was born and raised there. And, you know, I have never been part of a small town community per se, but I know that my mother grew up in a very, very small town, and all she has is positive memories from growing up in that small town. And she, even to this day, talks about the benefits of small town living versus growing up in the city. And I feel like the author's portrayal of a small town was only negative, and all she did was condescend it, when there are definitely positives to that type of environment. And maybe the author grew up in a small town and had negative experiences with it, but I feel like all you're doing is including your bias in your writing instead of including both positives and negatives to allow the reader to make their own decision. Anyway, so that was just another thing I didn't like about Starling House, unfortunately. All in all, this book was an interesting read. There were things that I liked about it and things that I definitely didn't like about it. I liked the writing style. I liked the fairy tale aspect to it. I liked the atmosphere. I liked the story of Starling House and the fantasy element of this. But this book is highly, highly character driven, and it is all about the characters changing and learning and growing. And considering that I did not like the characters, this book really was hard for me to get through. And there were times where I just didn't want to pick it up and I didn't want to read it. But it's a short book, it's like 300 pages, and I knew I could get through it. And I ended up giving this book, because of how divided I feel on it, a 2.5 out of 5 stars, right down the middle. There were definitely things I liked about it, definitely things I didn't like about it. Just something about the themes of this book, something about the portrayal of certain ideas in this book just didn't resonate well with me, and I just didn't connect with it. Would I recommend Starling House? Yes, I would, because I think it's a really good, fall creepy read. And would I read Alix E. Harrow again? Absolutely. I would try another one of her books, and if I do not connect to another one of her books, then I will discount her as an author that just does not work for me. Anyway, you guys, that is it for my review of Starling House. Let me know in the comments if you've read this book and what you thought of it, and I will see you all in another video soon. Goodbye!